Most people have a very strange relationship with pain. They want to avoid it at all costs. They don't want to be rejected. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want somebody to betray them. They don't want to look foolish. They don't want to lose. And because they are so afraid of being hurt, they develop all kinds of strategies to protect themselves. They become nice. They become agreeable. They avoid confrontation. They don't say what they really think. They don't take risks. They don't trust anybody completely, but they also don't want to admit that they're suspicious. And what they don't realize is that the more desperately you try to avoid being hurt, the weaker you actually become, because life is going to hurt you anyway. People are going to disappoint you. People are going to lie to you. Somebody you trusted is going to betray you. Somebody you helped is going to turn against you. And somebody you thought was your friend is going to reveal that they were never really your friend. And the question is not whether this is going to happen. The question is what you're going to do when it happens. Because there are people who get hurt once and become bitter for the rest of their lives. And then there are people who get hurt and become much more difficult to deceive the second time. That's the difference. The dangerous person is not somebody who has never been hurt. It's somebody who has been hurt and learned from it. We have this misconception that strength means protecting yourself from everything, but real strength comes from exposing yourself to reality and discovering that you can survive it. You have to be willing to walk into situations where you might lose. You have to be willing to trust people knowing that some people will betray you. You have to be willing to speak honestly knowing that sometimes people won't like you. You have to be willing to fail knowing that failure can make you feel small, because every time you experience something painful and survive it, you become a little less afraid. And that's incredibly important. Fear is one of the greatest things controlling human behavior. People don't realize how much of their life is organized around avoiding emotional pain. They stay in jobs they hate because they're afraid of starting over. They stay in relationships that make them miserable because they're afraid of being alone. They tolerate disrespect because they're afraid that standing up for themselves will create conflict. They don't pursue their ambitions because they're afraid that somebody will laugh at them. They don't take action because they are afraid of discovering that maybe they're not as talented as they thought. So they remain in this protected little world. And from the outside, they may look perfectly normal. They may even look successful. But underneath it all is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of humiliation, fear of being exposed. And if you are constantly organizing your life around avoiding those things, other people can control you without even realizing they're controlling you, because all they have to do is threaten the thing you're afraid of losing. If you're terrified of rejection, somebody can withdraw their approval. If you're terrified of conflict, somebody can intimidate you. If you're terrified of being alone, somebody can treat you badly and you will still stay. If you're terrified of failure, somebody can make you doubt yourself, and suddenly they have power over you. This is why you have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to develop the ability to say, fine, maybe they won't like me, fine. Maybe I will fail, fine. Maybe this person will leave, fine. Maybe I will get hurt. That doesn't mean you become reckless. It doesn't mean you deliberately go looking for pain. It means pain is no longer the thing making your decisions for you. That's a completely different mentality. And one of the most important things you can learn about people is that they can sense fear. They may not consciously say, this person is afraid, but they feel it. They notice when you desperately need their approval. They notice when you're trying too hard to please them. They notice when you're afraid to say no. They notice when you're afraid they'll leave. And sometimes, consciously or unconsciously, they begin to take advantage of it. I've seen this dynamic happen over and over again. Someone is extremely nice to everybody. They say yes to everything. They never complain. They are always available. They think they're being generous. But underneath that generosity is often a fear. They don't want people to dislike them. They want to be needed. They want to be accepted. So they keep giving. And then one day they become resentful. They think After everything I've done for these people, why don't they appreciate me? But that's the problem. You trained them to expect it. To You taught them that your boundaries don't matter. You taught them that you'll always be there. And now you're angry because they're behaving exactly as you trained them to behave. This is why you have to be willing to disappoint people. That's a very difficult lesson. You have to be willing to let somebody be angry with you. You have to be willing to let somebody misunderstand you. You have to be willing to walk away, because if you cannot tolerate the emotional pain of somebody being unhappy with you, you will never really be free. You'll always be negotiating your behavior around other people's reactions. And that's not power, that's dependence. Now, there's another side to this. Sometimes the pain doesn't come from other people directly. Sometimes it comes from failure. You try something and it doesn't work. You start a business and it fails. You approach somebody and they reject you. You create something and people criticize it. You work incredibly hard and somebody else gets the opportunity. And your first instinct is to protect your ego. You want to say, they were wrong. They don't understand. I was unlucky. They don't appreciate talent. Maybe that's true. Sometimes people are unfair. Sometimes circumstances really are against you. But if every painful experience becomes somebody else's fault, you learn nothing. You have to be able to look at yourself and say, what did this experience reveal about me? Maybe you were too trusting. Maybe you were too impatient. Maybe you didn't prepare enough. Maybe you ignored warning signs. Maybe you wanted success so badly that you stopped thinking clearly. Maybe you were trying to impress people instead of actually becoming good at what you do. That's where pain becomes useful. It gives you information. And this is one of the biggest differences between people who become stronger and people who become bitter. The bitter person asks, why did this happen to me? The stronger person eventually asks, what can I learn from this? That's a completely different question. Because when something painful happens, you have two choices. You can use it as evidence that the world is against you, or you can use it as information about how the world actually works. And the second person becomes dangerous because now they're paying attention. They don't make the same mistake 5 times. They don't keep trusting the same kind of person. They don't keep ignoring the same warning signs. They don't keep entering the same situations and expecting a different result. They adapt, and adaptability is one of the most powerful qualities you can develop. Think about somebody who has never experienced rejection. They may feel extremely confident, but that confidence is fragile. The first serious rejection can destroy them. The first major failure can make them question everything. The first betrayal can make them distrust everybody. Why? Because they have no psychological experience with pain. They don't know what it feels like. They don't know how to process it. They don't know how to recover. But somebody who has experienced rejection several times begins to understand something. Rejection hurts, but it doesn't kill you. Failure hurts, but it doesn't kill you. Being embarrassed hurts, but eventually you laugh about it. Being betrayed hurts, but eventually you understand that you survived it. And once you understand that, fear begins to lose some of its power. This is why you should not try to create a life where nothing bad ever happens to you. That's impossible. Instead, create a mind that can handle what happens. There's a great difference between being protected and being prepared. A protected person says, I hope nothing goes wrong. A prepared person says, if something goes wrong, I'll deal with it. That's the mentality you want, because you don't become dangerous by becoming cruel. You become dangerous when you become difficult to control. And the person who is difficult to control is the person who doesn't desperately need everything to go their way. They can lose. They can walk away. They can hear no. They can tolerate criticism. They can survive embarrassment. They can start again. That's freedom. And there's another important lesson here. You have to be careful not to confuse being hurt with being weak. Sometimes people experience pain and immediately think, I'm damaged. But pain doesn't automatically damage you. What you do with the pain determines what it becomes. You can turn betrayal into paranoia, or you can turn it into better judgment. You can turn rejection into insecurity, or you can turn it into emotional independence. You can turn failure into shame, or you can turn it into experience. You can turn criticism into resentment, or you can use it to see your blind spots. The event itself is not always the most important thing. The interpretation you give the event can completely change what happens afterward. And this is why you should actually study your painful experiences. Don't rush to forget them. Don't immediately distract yourself. Don't pretend you don't care. Look at them. Ask yourself what happened. Who was involved? What did you ignore? What did you want so badly that you stopped seeing reality? What did this person reveal about themselves? And perhaps most importantly, what did I reveal about myself? Because other people are going to show you who they are, but painful experiences also show you who you are. They reveal your weaknesses. They reveal your insecurities. They reveal where you are dependent on approval. They reveal what you are afraid to lose. And if you're honest enough to look at those things, you can begin to change them. This is where you develop what I would call emotional armor, not the kind of armor where you stop feeling. That's not strength, that's numbness. Real emotional armor means you can feel something deeply without allowing it to control your behavior. You can be hurt and still think clearly. You can be angry and still remain strategic. You can be disappointed and still move forward. You can care about somebody and still walk away from them. You can love people without becoming dependent on them. That's power. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is allow people to hurt you without immediately retaliating. Not because you're weak, because you're observing, you're learning, you're seeing what they're capable of. There are people who reveal themselves only after they believe they have power over you. Let them reveal themselves. You don't always need to fight. You don't always need to prove yourself. Sometimes the smart response is simply to remember what you saw, because once somebody shows you their character, believe them. Don't keep making excuses for them because you want the relationship to be what you imagined. Reality is often painful precisely because it destroys the fantasy we had about people. And this brings us back to the beginning. You cannot become powerful while being terrified of pain. You cannot become socially intelligent while refusing to be disappointed by people. You cannot become independent while desperately needing everybody to approve of you. You cannot become resilient while constantly protecting yourself from failure. At some point, you have to say, okay, I may get hurt and I'm going to move anyway. That's the mentality. You don't become dangerous because nobody can hurt you. You become dangerous because people can hurt you and you keep going. They reject you. You learn. They betray you. You learn. You fail. You learn. They disrespect you. You learn. You lose. You adapt. And eventually something changes. You stop entering situations with the desperate need to win. You stop needing everybody to like you. You stop begging people to stay. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what they want to believe. You stop being terrified of what might happen. And when fear stops making your decisions for you, you become much harder to manipulate. That's the real transformation. The goal is not to become heartless. The goal is to become emotionally strong enough that your heart doesn't make you stupid. Care about people, trust people, love people, take risks, build things, go after what you want. But understand that some of these things will hurt, and that's okay. Because every time reality hurts you and you have the courage to face it instead of running from it, you become a little wiser, a little calmer, a little harder to deceive, and eventually you develop something much more valuable than the ability to avoid pain. You develop the ability to survive it. And once you know you can survive almost anything, people lose a tremendous amount of power over you. That is when you become dangerous. But there is something even deeper you have to understand about pain. Sometimes the person hurting you is not trying to hurt you. Sometimes they're simply showing you who they are. And that's a very difficult thing for people to accept, because when we care about someone, we don't see them objectively. We see the version of them that we want to believe exists. We remember the good moments. We remember what they said. We remember how they made us feel in the beginning. And when their behavior starts changing, we create explanations for them. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're going through something. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. And sometimes that's true. but sometimes you're simply refusing to accept what is right in front of you. This is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional weakness. Not that somebody hurt you, but that you keep giving the person opportunities to hurt you again because you don't want to believe what you've already learned. You have to learn to separate your feelings about someone from your judgment of them. You can love somebody and still recognize that they're bad for you. You can appreciate what somebody did for you in the past and still understand that they cannot be part of your future. You can forgive somebody without trusting them again. Those are completely different things. Forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the emotional burden. Trust is about deciding whether somebody has earned access to you again. And people confuse the two all the time. They think, if I forgive them, I have to trust them. No, you can forgive someone and still keep your distance. In fact, sometimes distance is the only way to understand what a relationship was really doing to you. When you're constantly surrounded by somebody, you become accustomed to their behavior. You stop noticing the small insults. You stop noticing the manipulation. You stop noticing how often you compromise. You just call it normal, then you leave. And suddenly you realize, wait a second, why do I feel so much lighter? That's information. Your body sometimes understands something before your conscious mind does. You become exhausted around certain people. You become anxious when they call. You start rehearsing what you're going to say before talking to them because you're afraid of their reaction. You feel guilty for having normal needs. You feel like you have to constantly prove that you're a good person. Pay attention to that because the people around you can influence your perception of yourself. And if you spend enough time around somebody who constantly criticizes you, eventually you may begin to hear their voice inside your own head. That's how psychological influence works. It doesn't always look like somebody controlling you. Sometimes it looks like you controlling yourself according to what you think they will think. And that's why getting hurt can actually wake you up. The betrayal reveals the relationship. The rejection reveals the dependency. The failure reveals the weakness. The criticism reveals the insecurity. The loss reveals what you were too attached to. Pain strips away the story you were telling yourself, and reality comes through. This is why you should never waste a painful experience. If somebody betrays you, don't just say people are terrible. That's too easy. Ask yourself, why did I trust this person? What did I miss? Was I ignoring something because I wanted the relationship to work? Did I confuse charm with character? Did I mistake attention for loyalty? Those questions make you stronger because now the experience has become knowledge, and knowledge changes your future behavior. You begin to notice patterns. You notice people who talk endlessly about how everybody else has betrayed them. You notice people who never accept responsibility. You notice people who constantly need attention. You notice people who become strangely competitive with their friends. You notice people who congratulate you but somehow make the moment about themselves. You notice people who only respect boundaries after you enforce them. You notice people who become different when you become successful. These details matter because human beings reveal themselves through patterns, not through one conversation, not through one smile, not through one compliment, patterns. And the person who has been hurt enough to become observant starts looking for those patterns. They don't immediately trust, but they also don't become paranoid. That's an important distinction. Paranoia says, everyone is going to hurt me. Wisdom says, some people will hurt me, so I'll pay attention. That's much healthier. You don't need to build a wall around yourself. You need a door, and you need to decide who gets through it. That's what boundaries really are. They're not punishments, they're filters. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with another person is simply show them the consequences of their behavior. If they disrespect you, you don't have to scream. You don't have to threaten them. You don't have to prove that you're tougher. You simply reduce their access to you. That's it. Because access is a privilege. Your time is a privilege. Your attention is a privilege. Your trust is a privilege. And if somebody repeatedly demonstrates that they don't value those things, you don't have to keep offering them. This is where many people become confused. They think strength means winning arguments. It doesn't. Sometimes strength means refusing to participate in the argument. They think strength means getting revenge. It doesn't. Sometimes strength means becoming so focused on your own development that revenge becomes irrelevant. They think strength means making other people afraid. It doesn't. Real strength is when you don't need other people to be afraid of you. You simply know what you're willing to tolerate and you act accordingly. There's something very powerful about a person who has already accepted the possibility of loss. Because you cannot manipulate someone effectively with the threat of something they've already accepted. If they know they can survive being alone, you can't control them with abandonment. If they know they can survive rejection, you can't control them with disapproval. If they know they can survive failure, you can't control them by telling them they'll fail. If they know they can survive embarrassment, you can't control them by threatening to expose them. This is why accepting pain creates freedom. You remove the weapon from the other person's hand, and that doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become less desperate. And desperation is one of the easiest things for people to exploit. You see it in relationships, you see it in business, you see it in friendships, you see it in social situations. The person who desperately needs something is usually willing to sacrifice more than the person who can walk away. So, one of the greatest psychological advantages you can develop is the ability to say, I want this, but I don't need it. That's a very different mindset. I want this relationship, but I don't need this person to validate me. I want this job, but I can survive if they say no. I want this opportunity, but I can create another one. I want people to respect me, but I don't need everybody's approval. That is emotional independence. And emotional independence doesn't mean you stop caring. It means your care doesn't become a weakness that somebody else can use against you. Now, this is where getting hurt becomes part of your education. Every difficult person you encounter teaches you something. The manipulator teaches you to recognize manipulation. The layer teaches you to pay attention to inconsistencies. The narcissistic person teaches you to recognize excessive self-focus. The envious person teaches you to notice subtle hostility beneath compliments. The unreliable person teaches you to judge people by patterns rather than promises. And the person who betrays you teaches you perhaps the most important lesson of all: you cannot control another person's character. You can only control who you give access to. That's a huge realization, because many people spend years trying to change people. They think, if I love them enough, they'll change. If I explain myself enough, they'll understand. If I'm patient enough, they'll appreciate me. If I prove my loyalty, they'll become loyal. But people don't change because you need them to. They change when they decide to change. And sometimes the strongest decision you can make is to stop waiting. You have to accept people as they are, not as you hope they'll become. That can be painful. But again, pain is information. Reality hurts less when you stop arguing with it. And there is another kind of pain you have to become comfortable with: the pain of outgrowing people. This one is difficult because nobody necessarily did anything wrong. You simply changed. Your priorities changed. Your ambitions changed. Your standards changed. And suddenly the people you used to spend every night with don't understand you anymore. You start talking about building something. They want to talk about gossip. You start thinking about your future. They want to talk about what everybody else is doing. You start becoming disciplined. They make fun of you for taking things seriously. And eventually you realize that staying connected to them requires you to become smaller again. That is another form of pain, because leaving people behind can make you feel guilty. But growth often creates distance. You cannot become a completely different person while demanding that every relationship in your life remain exactly the same. Some relationships are built around an older version of you, and when that version disappears, the relationship may disappear with it. Let it. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to insult them. You don't have to announce that you've outgrown them. You simply continue moving, because one of the most dangerous things you can do to yourself is remain loyal to an identity that no longer fits you because you're afraid of disappointing other people. You have to be willing to disappoint them. You have to be willing to disappoint your old self. You have to be willing to become unfamiliar to people who knew you before you changed. And yes, that can hurt. But there is a strange thing that happens when you repeatedly survive these experiences. You become calmer. You stop reacting so quickly. You stop needing immediate answers. You stop chasing people who pull away. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't care. You stop fighting every battle. You start observing. And observation gives you power because when you're emotionally overwhelmed, you react. When you're calm, you can think. You can see motives. You can see patterns. You can see what people are actually doing instead of what they are saying. That's why emotional control is so important. A person who can remain calm while being provoked has an enormous advantage over someone who needs to react immediately. The other person may be trying to make you angry. They may be trying to make you defend yourself. They may be trying to make you prove something. Don't give them that control. Take a breath, step back, watch. Ask yourself, what exactly are they trying to make me feel? What happens if I don't react? Sometimes the answer is very revealing because when you stop reacting, the person loses their leverage and they may become even more aggressive. That's when you learn something. Their goal was never communication. Their goal was control. Again, you learned something, and that's the entire philosophy. You don't have to enjoy being hurt. You don't have to search for suffering. You don't have to become cynical, but you have to stop treating pain as evidence that you should retreat from life. Pain is part of the price of becoming perceptive. Every scar represents something you understand now that you didn't understand before. And eventually, you begin to develop a different relationship with risk. You still feel fear, you still feel pain, you still care, but you don't automatically obey those emotions. You listen to them, you study them, and then you decide that's maturity. And that's where the title of this idea becomes important. You must be willing to get hurt by people if you want to become dangerous, not dangerous because you're violent, not dangerous because you're cruel, dangerous because you are no longer easily manipulated, dangerous because rejection doesn't destroy you, dangerous because betrayal doesn't make you lose your mind, dangerous because criticism doesn't automatically make you defensive, dangerous because you can walk away, dangerous because you can start over, dangerous because you have learned that losing something doesn't mean losing yourself. That's the person people eventually respect, not because that person demands respect, but because they don't desperately need it. They've been hurt. They've been disappointed. They've been rejected. They've trusted the wrong people. They've made mistakes. And somehow they kept moving. That's the real source of confidence, not positive thinking, not pretending you're invincible. Experience. You know what it feels like to fall, and you know you can stand back up. So don't spend your life trying to create a world where nobody can hurt you. Create a mind that can handle the people who do. Trust, but observe. Love, but keep your judgment. Forgive, but remember the lesson. Take risks, but learn from the consequences. And when someone hurts you, don't immediately ask, how could they do this to me? Ask, what is reality trying to teach me? Because if you can ask that question honestly, even your worst experiences can become part of your strength. And eventually, the thing that once made you afraid becomes the thing that made you stronger. You stop fearing the possibility of pain. You stop fearing rejection. You stop fearing being alone. You stop fearing failure. And when you stop being afraid of losing everything, you become much harder to control. That is when you become dangerous, not because you can hurt other people, but because you finally understand that nobody else gets to decide who you become.